p.m. Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. I know we have people that have joined this webinar, this direct session, but there are also people that are watching this via the alternative link on YouTube, which is on our website and via Facebook as well. Good evening, my name is Gary Guyver. I'm the Director of Planning at Tendring District Council, and I'm very pleased to welcome you this evening. This is one of a number of consultation engagement sessions that the Council, working with HAP Projects, is undertaking in the coming weeks to get some ideas and some feedback about the future of Jaywick Sands, both in the long term through a place plan that will guide the future of the area, and also about what can be developed in the future in the area through a design guide. All really intended to see what we can do to try and improve people's lives in the Jaywick Sands area, but also with an eye on the fact that it is a coastal area, and with sea level rise, it's a constant challenge that we need to be on top of going forward. As I said, my name is Gary Guyver. I've been with Tendring Council about 20 years, man and boy, if you like. Grew up in the Clacton-on-Sea area, know Jaywick Sands pretty well, spent a lot of my youth in that area. And the way that we're going to run this session is that I'm going to ask my colleague Hannah Loftus from HAP Projects to run through a presentation explaining what this is all about, and there will be opportunity either at the end of the presentation to put forward ideas or questions, but we do have the opportunity through the Q&A function, which those who have joined the call may see at the top of the screen, to please type in your suggestions, your reactions, your ideas and questions. And as we go through the session later on, we'll try and pick some of those up. We are intending to record this session, so I hope people don't mind. If you do mind, unfortunately, you might want to log off at this point, but I think it's just useful to keep a record of some of the ideas that come forward so that we can look back on those. And as we carry on with this project, we make sure that we pick up some of the suggestions that have been put forward. Well, at this juncture, Hannah, if you're happy to give your presentation to the ladies and gents that are listening in to us, I'll hand over to Hannah Loftus from HAP Projects. Thank you.
Thanks, Gary. Good evening, everybody. My name's Hannah Loftus. I'm one of the directors at HAP Projects, and we're the lead consultants, working with Tendring Council to deliver and develop the place plan. I believe Will is going to just share some slides, so we have got a few visual aids just to talk you through what it is we're trying to do, why we're consulting, and so forth. Oh, brilliant. There we are. Next slide, please. So why are we being asked to develop a place plan for Jaywick in the first place? Well, the local plan for Tendring, which was adopted last year and has been going through a long process of development before that, sets out, as indeed the plan before that did, a really strong objective to improve Jaywick Sands as a place and make the community a more sustainable one in terms of its economic, community and employment opportunities. It sets out 5 objectives. One is around housing and quality in the built environment. One is around flood resilience. One is around connectivity to neighbouring areas. So that means connecting Jaywick Sands better to Clacton, to other places around the area. One is around attracting business and economic opportunities. And one is around access to public services, health and wellbeing. So those are the objectives that the place plan is looking to meet. Obviously, the place plan is only one part of the puzzle. Tendring Council only controls and can do so much. And there is much wider partnership working happening across Essex County Council, across many of the other agencies, third sector organisations, charities and community groups as well. But the place plan is really intended to be a strategic framework for guiding what happens in Jaywick going forward. Next slide, please. So, as we mentioned, the place plan is building on some of the work already done, work by Tendring, work by community groups and others, but it is that framework to guide what's next. It will set out what projects are needed to achieve the objectives that were on the previous slide, and why and how they're going to help achieve those objectives. And it is primarily a spatial plan, so it is about the physical changes to the physical environment, but of course those physical changes are ones that can or should enable those wider social and economic and environmental objectives to happen within them. So it is really important as a plan to say what should change or what should be built in Jaywick Sands, where it should be built, and how. Next slide, please. I have to apologise, by the way, that I have got a bad cold, so I apologise for that. A number of options were considered at an early stage, and it's important that we talk about which ones have been ruled out and which ones we're consulting on now. So we know that in the past there have been many different ideas for Jaywick Sands, not all of them very positive. And at this point, some of those rather drastic ideas have been ruled out. So a kind of full demolition of Jaywick Sands, rehousing residents into other areas, that's not on the table. Comprehensive redevelopment of Brooklands, so that means sort of knocking everything down and then rebuilding it, but in the same place. That's also not on the table, not in a kind of wholesale form. And then the other option that's not on the table is building on the fields that sit between the kind of back of Brooklands, grasslands, and the Tudor estate, so the area known as Tudor Fields. So that has also been looked at high level, but it has been discounted for a number of reasons, not least that it's outside the settlement framework as defined in the local plan, and also it has some wildlife value. Some of the ideas that we are taking forward for this consultation are some more limited housing development on land that is owned by the council itself. So that's, for instance, land either side of Lotus Way that isn't built on at the moment. And also that there are some individual small plots owned within Brooklands by the council. Other options that are being considered are potentially purchasing additional parcels to redevelop alongside those small plots, and then a whole range of other projects that could take place, whether they're about public realm, so the streets and open spaces, environmental improvements, and other projects around the local economy and infrastructure deficits. Next slide, please. So why we're consulting and what do we want to know from you? Well, broadly speaking, and we had an event the other day, one of the first in-person events, some people said, well, where's the plan? Tell us what you're planning. And actually, we don't have a plan yet. The reason we're doing this consultation is to say we've got some very early stage thoughts and questions in our mind, but we need you to tell us what we should be doing next, what you think are the most important priorities. So at the very basic, it is, what do you value about Jaywick Sands? What do you like about Jaywick Sands as a place, and what you'd like to change? We are talking about a place that has had extraordinary history. It's not even been around for 100 years, and yet it's had these amazing kind of highs and lows, and lots of drama in between at times as well. And there's so much that is positive in Jaywick Sands, and we're really keen to build on that positive energy, that positive community spirit in Jaywick, whilst addressing the real issues. Next slide, please. One of the big questions we have is around housing. So most of the homes in Jaywick were not ever meant to be lived in full time. They were not really meant to be lived in at all. In fact, they were really meant just as holiday beach chalets, glorified beach huts. And you can see on this slide some of the historic images of the beach huts when they were, the chalets when they were being sold and marketed originally. And if you look around Jaywick Sands today, you can actually see those shapes of those buildings still there in the village. They've been clad over with different cladding materials, and they've had some extensions and things done to them, but they're still, broadly speaking, the same homes. And not all of them are in great condition. And most importantly of all, very few of them are genuinely flood safe. So we want to know from people who live in Jaywick, who rent in Jaywick, what they think about their own housing situation. If they own a house, would you like to improve it? If you rent a house, how's that working for you? What sort of quality home are you in? And what are your aspirations for the future? Would you actually like to continue living in Jaywick, or would you like to go elsewhere? Next slide, please. And this will be used to help inform the strategy around building or not building more council homes in Jaywick, because obviously there's no point in building homes if actually the community says, you know what, we don't need more people in the area, we don't want more people to be living in this area, we want to actually, maybe some of us don't want to live in Jaywick anymore, we want to go elsewhere. Or alternatively, you may tell us, well, actually, you know, we really do need better quality new housing here, and we do like the idea that maybe homes in poor condition could be demolished because you're actually going to rehouse those residents in new council homes that are better quality, and then that could potentially encourage a virtuous circle, if you like, whereby if you're demolishing a poor quality home, you can then build another better quality home, rehouse more residents into that, demolish the potentially less good homes that they were in, and so forth. But these are all really, really early stage ideas, and we really just want to hear whether they sound like an appealing prospect to people in the community or not. Next slide, please. Flooding, obviously a massive issue here. Oh, it hasn't come up yet, sorry. That's come up now. Flooding is a massive issue. And, you know, I think it's worth stressing that whilst things have changed a lot since 1953, one thing that has also changed along with the internet and many social things is sea level rise. The sea is much higher now than it was then, but actually the sea wall itself hasn't kept up. The sea wall saw some improvements after 1953 and the floods then, but really it hasn't had much done to it for several decades now, and 1953 was nearly 70 years ago. It'll be 70 years in January. So if that sort of storm happened today, that waves would come over the seawall at Jaywick Sands now. That's what the modelling from the Environment Agency shows us. And it could actually flood up to over a metre of water in some parts of Jaywick Sands. So it's already a problem, flooding. I mean, it is already something that could happen now and could cause serious damage to at least some homes along the seafront area. Next slide, please. But in the future, we know that unless something is done to improve or upgrade those flood defences, the picture does look pretty alarming. So this is a map of, in 100 years' time or so, the amount of Jaywick Sands that would be flooded. And that could be depths of, you know, over 3 metres of water. So that's well over head height across the whole of this area. And to protect Jaywick against that, if a very simplistic option was taken, which was just to raise up the existing seawall, that would need to be raised by about 4 foot, 1.2 metres, which would have a massive impact. Now, we're not saying that that's on the table. We don't have the reports from the Environment Agency yet. We were hoping to have them by this consultation, but we don't have them yet. But we really want to hear what you and the community think about flood risk, whether it's already worrying you, whether it's worrying you for the future, how you think Tendring Council and Essex County Council and all the other partners involved here should address that flood risk, whether it's through the housing question, whether it's through the infrastructure, whether it's through the landscape and so forth. We'd like to know what you think about the flood risk situation so we can better understand at what point in the future that is something that is going to really worry people, or whether it's already worrying people now. Next slide, please. Then on to more immediate improvements. The streets, spaces, open spaces, shops and services in the community. Obviously, the streets were improved a number of years ago, and really that made a huge difference, of course, but Brooklands itself is not in great condition. It doesn't have a safe pavement along it, and it can have some pretty antisocial sort of driving behaviour, as well as, of course, all the potholes and so forth that we know about and that we hope are going to be addressed in the near future as a short-term fix. So we have a few ideas about how Brooklands could be improved, for instance, becoming a one-way street. And we have a few other ideas or thoughts about other spaces in Jaywick Sands that also maybe don't work as well as they could and could be improved. Next slide, please. For instance, the green spaces that are really lovely. It's great that Jaywick has so many green spaces, but maybe they're not as well used as they might be in terms of the equipment, the facilities, other things that could happen in those spaces, particularly because people in Jaywick don't tend to have really big gardens at all. Up in the Tudor estate, some houses have pretty good gardens, but down in Brooklands and in the village, gardens are really tiny. So those green spaces seem to us to be really important, but we want to know what you think. And we also want to know what you think about the provision of shops and services. Do you think they're adequate? We hear some things from people when we're working in the community about a lack of certain types of shops and services, particularly in the kind of Brooklands area. And we'd like to know what you think, because there's no point us planning for new facilities if they're going to double up on what's already there and people like what's there already, or if it's just not something that people feel they need at all. Next slide, please. And lastly, we'd like to know what you think about the character of Jaywick. And this is so important because it's one thing to regenerate a place, but it's really important it doesn't lose its soul. We want to make sure that the environment that is created still feels like Jaywick Sands, the best of Jaywick Sands, and takes that forward into the future. And I've just realised that this slide has one paragraph repeated on it. I don't quite know how that happened, so apologies for that. So we'd like to know what you think about the existing buildings of Jaywick Sands, the layout, some of the newer buildings that have been built, what kind of character and style of homes and other buildings we should be looking to create in Jaywick Sands, and what you value about the character. So one last bit about the SPD that I was going to talk to you about, about the place plan that I was going to talk to you about, is an allied document that we're also consulting on at this point in time, which is a design guide, and it builds on this question around the design and character, but it's a piece of planning guidance that we've been asked to develop by Tendring Council in the meantime, because of the issues around flood risk in the design of new homes. So I'm just going to really briefly try and run through this. It is a little bit technical, so I do apologise in advance if anybody isn't following it fully. But what I would say is that the full document is available to read on Tendring Council's website. You're welcome to also ask questions in the Q&A or email through to the consultation email address afterwards, or come and meet us at one of the in-person events that we've got coming up if anything isn't understood very well. Next slide, please. So one of the challenges that we identified early on in this work on the place plan was around existing planning applications that are submitted for sites within Jaywick. And at the present time, it's very difficult for planners, because planners want to encourage new homes to be built and sites to be regenerated and developed in Jaywick Sands, at the same time as they want them to be flood safe, and at the same time as it's really important that they don't impact neighbours to an unreasonable degree. And what we found was that there wasn't a whole lot of consistency in balancing all of those factors. So sometimes developments were being permitted which, if they were to be built out, might actually have quite significant impacts on neighbouring homes and gardens, and that was potentially not an ideal situation. So the new design guidance that we have developed has been worked on with the Environment Agency and with Tendring Council's planners. If you could just go to the next slide, please. This is a little bit of a diagram to try and explain what we've been trying to achieve. So homes designed under the current guidance, that's the blue dot. Currently, they're extremely flood safe, which is great. I mean, that's fantastic, obviously, but they can have quite tricky neighbour impacts because they can end up being quite tall and so forth. Our ideal scenario, which is the green dot, is that you've got extremely flood safe dwellings without any of those neighbour impacts. But the reality of some of the plots and the sites within Brooklands and Grafton's in particular, because they're so small, is that it's pretty much impossible to design a home that does that. So if you were aiming for the ideal scenario, if you said the only time you could build a new home would be if it's going to be safe for 100 years and not impact your neighbours, the reality is that no one would ever replace their home with something any better, and you might end up keeping poor quality houses in Jaywick Sands, which isn't great for anybody, because actually we do really want people who have houses that aren't flood safe to improve them. because as I mentioned, the sort of light blue dot, which is most existing homes, whilst they may have no impact on their neighbours, are also very, very unsafe in flood situation today. So what we're trying to say is here that with the new guidance is that replacement homes under the new rules would prioritise reducing their neighbour impacts and a reasonable degree of flood safety as a result. So not 100 years of dry floors, but much, much safer than homes today. So we hope that will encourage people to redevelop their homes if they own homes in Jaywick Sands and they don't feel that they're very safe, with something a little bit better. If you could just go on to the next slide. So this shows some of the consents that were coming forward into planning applications previously, and some of the overshadowing and so forth issues that they were exhibiting. The next slide, please. And then this slide shows the agreed approach for replacement dwelling. So this only works if you're replacing on the same plot as an existing home. What this basically says is that your ground floor levels need to be an improvement from present day levels on the house that you're replacing, and they must be set so that they would not flood in the present day design flood event. So if that 1953 style event happened today, all of your habitable spaces would be dry. But they don't have to all be raised up so that they're safe for 100 years. You do have to have one room, you have to have your refuge space that will be safe for 100 years, but you don't have to have all of those rooms raised up. So that means that the home can be lower, can have less obtrusive neighbour impacts. And there's a bunch of other guidance that goes along with this. Next slide, please. What we are saying is that if someone wants to develop a large number of plots or do development that is going to basically increase the number of people who are living in Jaywick Sands, then they need to apply the ideal scenario, the perfect, best quality development standards, whereby all habitable space is dry for 100 years and it has no neighbour impacts, and it provides for all of its parking and outdoor garden space and everything for all of those homes on the plot. So what that means in reality, and this is just an illustrative example, is that if someone did want to build taller buildings, they would need to ensure that their land ownership included enough space around that building so that there was enough breathing room before the next neighbouring home, and then therefore there wouldn't be those tricky neighbour impacts in terms of daylight, sunlight and privacy. Next slide, please. These are just a few of the other matters covered by this draft design guide, and we're consulting on that as well at the moment, so you can find out about that on Tendring Council's website. There's a number of rules and so forth in there. It's a little mini design code really for how to design appropriately in Jaywick Sands across all of these different factors. Next slide, please. So we've got a number of sessions, drop-in sessions coming up. If anyone would like to come and meet myself, our team at HAP Projects, any of the officers who are involved in the project from Tendring Council's perspective. And these are the dates. We've got some exhibition material that we're showing. We have paper feedback forms. We have all sorts of things that you can access and talk to us about, because we know that these are really big and complicated issues, and reading stuff online isn't always everyone's cup of tea. Reading things full stop isn't everyone's cup of tea. Sometimes you just really need to talk it through with someone. So please do come along if you'd like to any of these open sessions over the next couple of weeks. They were rescheduled from the earlier ones due to obviously the sad passing of the Queen. Next slide. Oh, I think that's the previous one. Oh, there was another one, but doesn't matter. It just said where to find more information, which is on Tendring's website, and there's an online survey as well. There's a number of little videos on there that explain some of these big issues and talk you through some of the things like flood risk. So do go on to Tendring Council's website and visit that, and there's also an email address there. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much for your presentation, Hannah, and explaining the the consultation that we're doing and the kind of feedback that we're hoping to get from local people in the area. Those face-to-face events that are coming up, I'd please those that are listening, if you do get the opportunity to come along to speak to us at those, it will be really useful to gauge some of the ideas and thoughts on this. Obviously, the 24th of September has gone, and I understand that the attendance to that was pretty good, and we got some useful comments coming back about a range of things, not all necessarily related to the future planning of the area and flood issues, but a whole range of issues that are on people's minds and that are being fed back to the council and being considered as part of this process. And I appreciate there are a lot of people watching and listening to the webinar via the YouTube, Facebook link, and we've got some people that have actually joined the call as well. Thank you very much for your time. Anthony, my colleague Anthony, are there any comments that have come up specifically from the discussion online that we need to pick up now?
We don't have any comments at the moment, but people are very welcome to ask their questions in the Q&A, or just raise their hands actually and ask a question directly to yourself, Gary, or Hannah, about any point at all.
Yes, so please do. For those, I know we've got a few people that have joined the call. If anybody wants to add anything or ask a question, feel free to do so. If not, please, please come along to one of our events, put a question or a comment into the Q&A, or email us on the oh, excellent, we've got someone that likes to speak. I believe it's Chris. Hello, sir or madam.
Yes, hello.
Hello, Chris.
Chris here, village resident. Do you intend tonight to speak in any way about the Jaywick Sands Place Plan interim report that you've published and have on your website?
Well, I think we can probably take comments on it, and Hannah and the team may respond.
Rather hoping to get some presentation on it, given that it is a fairly detailed report, and probably I think that's what most people would be hoping to hear about on this seminar, rather than more simply the broad outline of what you may or may not be intending to do.
Thanks very much, Chris. I don't know whether you wanted to sort of comment on the status and the purpose of that document in all of this. And I mean, we'd be happy because when we go to these face-to-face events, I think we take copies of that document along to run through. But Hannah, did you want to comment on Chris's observation?
So, yeah, absolutely. So that interim report really summarises a lot of the baseline evidence and data that has led us to this point of being able to go out to consultation. So we're going out to consultation with a better understanding of what the existing challenges are, and a better understanding of some of the parameters, if you like, of feasibility, of what is felt to be a kind of scoped in or scoped out. So that's what I sort of referred to at the start of the presentation. There are some things that have been ruled in and there's some things that have been ruled out. And that report essentially presents the logic chain, if you like, to why various options have been taken forward at this point in time or not. So really, really happy to answer any questions about that report. As you rightly say, it's totally in the public domain, was published with the papers as part of the lead up to the consultation. So it's very much there for you to read, and I'm really glad you have read it.
Well, in particular, referring to, as you do, to the aspect of the sea wall and what you're going to do with flood prevention, which of the proposals in the interim report have either been ruled in or ruled out?
None of them have been really scoped beyond the very, very outline, because we need that report from the Environment Agency to actually help us. We don't know enough yet about it. So whilst they're extremely high level, kind of vastly divergent approaches that are shown there, they are deliberately not developed in any level of detail at this point in time, because we just don't know. But, I think what has obviously been ruled out is looking at any kind of do nothing scenario, if you like, at this point. We know that stuff does need to be done here. So, but we need to have that information from the Environment Agency to say what do they think is going happening, because it's their flood defences first and foremost. So they're going to come forward with proposals for improving the flood defences and some costs associated. Those will have to be assessed to see if they're fundable, if they're feasible, and so forth. There's a process for that. So there's a funding formula that the Environment Agency works to that allocates the amount of funding that could possibly be spent on the flood defences. And then there's a question of, well, is the engineering solution that they come up with what everybody really wants to see, or should we be looking at some very different approaches that are going to maybe deliver additional benefits? So maybe landscaping approaches outside of the seawall onto the beach, or different sorts of approaches that could create a better environment for the community as a whole. I hope that helps answer your question, but if not, please feel free to ask a follow-up.
Thank you. That's very useful. I suppose in terms of a follow-up, why has there been no coordination between you, Tendring, Essex County, and the Environment Agency? Why are we having this consultation process without any input from the Environment Agency? It feels to me, and I may be wrong about this, Gary, you might be able to assist, that this seems like yet another proposal for Jaywick that comes and goes.
We have been coordinating with them.
And I'm sorry, and is without anything other than a very flimsy paper exercise.
No, I'm happy to respond to that initially, Chris. Yeah, I mean, in my time that I've been with Tendring, I've seen various reports, various ideas come and go. And the big sticking point that has always been there is this issue around flood risk and what the projections are for how flood levels might change and what might be an appropriate response to that in terms of reinforcement of seawalls, whether it be the type and design of properties that are allowed there through the planning process. But what we have found is that if we don't have a plan in place, and this has been the situation we've had for decades, really, there's been sort of aspirations and ideas, but they've never really been put down into a comprehensive plan, is that we have, over the years, brought people down from government, had sort of busloads of dignitaries from Whitehall to show them Jaywick Sands and to describe some of the challenges that we face and our fears about the future and our hopes about the future. But what we haven't had is an actual plan to show what we could do about it and what money might be required to make some of these things happen. And it's such a difficult situation to resolve. I think if it was easy, we would have had a plan in place a long time ago, and I think we'd have 100% coordination between the different agencies. The challenge here is that the Environment Agency standard rules on what happens in flood risk area is not to have any new development at all. But sometimes that's a bit blind to the fact there are actually established communities in these flood risk areas and that require a bespoke approach. You can't just ignore the fact that you've got communities in those areas and a strong sense of community in the case of Jaywick Sands. And what we found with the Environment Agency is that one government comes in and makes the flood risk rules a lot more flexible, and everyone gets excited about what you can do. And then there'll be a major flood event somewhere in the country, and then the flood risk rules get tight again. And we always find that we're sort of caught between these peaks and troughs in terms of what the Environment Agency's position is. But they are engaged in this process, as Hannah has said. The missing piece of information, which is going to help us put a bit more meat on the bones of this, is that the flood and sea defence report. That will be a key piece of evidence going forward. But at this stage, I think it's still important to go ahead with the consultation. It's still important to get people's views back, because at the next stage, when we actually do have something a bit more concrete, pardon the pun, because it might not be concrete, that is the solution, we would have had that proper input from the Environment Agency in terms of their technical advice. But I take that completely on board. In an ideal world, Chris, I think we would have all of the agencies together with a comprehensive solution, but that's where we need to get to, and this is one step in that process.
And so what's our timing for getting the Environment Agency's report?
Thanks very much. Hannah, do we have a latest indication?
They, by their own admission, are late with it. We were hoping that we would have it by now, but we do hope, fingers crossed, later in this year. Obviously, then Tendring and Essex will need to read that report and digest what it means and so forth. But I suppose the only other bit I would just add to that is that in our experience of some of these sorts of places and regeneration projects, it can be a little bit chicken and egg around the infrastructure improvements and the regeneration potential, because actually if you've got a really great plan for how you're going to regenerate somewhere, it can actually help with that funding discussion. If you're just going to government and saying, give us a fact check to fill a gap in the funding for flood defences, but you don't have a vision for what you're going to do as a result of that, what that's going to enable the community to do and how that's going to enable the community to thrive, sometimes Treasury will go, well, it doesn't look like a really great plan to us here, because, you know, we could spend that money differently, or, you know, we could look at other places. So having a vision and also showing that the community, that's derived from what the community have told us, is really important, because then we can actually say to those stakeholders and to government that the community have told us they really, really want to see whatever it is that comes out of this consultation as being the top few priorities. And it gives us a lot of those answers to some of those tricky questions from funders when they say, well, you know, where's this all coming from and what do the community think, and all those questions that they will inevitably ask down the line.
Yes, and I suppose helpfully, by producing all of this far too early in advance of the Environment Agency's report, Gary, there's probably a potential that you've blighted the values in the village and in Brooklands, whilst with these reports and with these suggestions in the interim plan.
Well, it's interesting you raise that, Chris, because in my time at Tendring and in the area, we've gone from one extreme to the other in terms of what the council's policy is on Jaywick Sands. And way before my time in the early 70s, it was about compulsory purchase and moving everybody out of the area completely, which was a very radical suggestion at the time, which failed following a High Court challenge, and the council's never really gone near that kind of scenario again. But at the opposite end of the spectrum, in about 2005 or 6, when government policy changed around flood risk, actually the council introduced extremely difficult planning policies, which aspired to achieve really high level development of 2 to 3 stories over triple plots, because at that time the Environment Agency rules were very strict about what you could and couldn't build within a flood risk area. But as a result of that, we did have those kind of issues about impact on property values. And essentially, because the rules were so strict, nobody could do anything. Nobody could come forward with a planning proposal that would represent a development that would help improve the quality of the area. And essentially, that policy didn't work because nobody was going to invest in the area, and that was a real problem.
Gary, thanks. I appreciate that.
Yep.
As a planner, you're obviously look towards the new builds. The blight issue really doesn't come in. That new builds aren't really part of that. This is about the trading and the sale and the purchase and the churn of existing stock.
Yes. Well, I think from that position that I mentioned there, sort of in the late noughties, where we had this position where nothing could be built at all, that policy didn't work and the policies were lifted. So in the current council local plan, there are no prescriptive requirements about what you can and can't build, and therefore really they haven't had so much of an effect on what can be bought or sold, or how the market operates. I think what comes out of this process in terms of a place plan for the future, because bearing in mind at the moment these are early reports to help guide what policy the council might put in place going forward. When we actually have a resolution, of course, those are going to have an impact on property values, what people's hope for property can be, the trading, the selling of property, and so on. But the stage we're at the moment, the planning policies are quite loose, and what people can and can't do really is the council has to consider each one on its merits. And we have approved schemes in the area. Some of them have been delivered, others haven't. But go back 10, 12 years, nothing was getting approved at all, nothing was getting bought, nothing was getting sold. There is a bit more churn in the market now. I mean, Hannah, you might be a bit closer to what the activity actually is in the area. And I don't know if you've got any comments on what impact these interim reports might have on the market in response to what Chris has said.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's interesting because we've been working on the place plan for too much of the blame for depressing them. However, certainly what we have heard is that the prospect of improvements to Jaywick Sands, and indeed the actual improvements that have been taking place in Jaywick Sands over a number of different projects and initiatives, are having a more positive impact on property prices. Now, obviously, I don't know, I couldn't tell you for every type of house, every street, every part of the community, and a very granular level of detail, but at least that is some of the feedback that we have had from agents. And whilst agents will tell their story, and we know that isn't, that is only one part of the picture, I think that plans that show Tendring Council is taking the regeneration of Jaywick Sands seriously should be positive for values and actual fact. It should show that there is an energy to make change, positive change, and not to just let Jaywick, if you like, kind of decline and not have any improvements over time, which of course would just increase the blight, the physical blight, the social blight, and so forth, that is already part of some of the reason why Jaywick Sands is a focus for regeneration in the first place.
Chris, is that a particular concern that you're raising about the potential for these plans to have sort of unintended consequences for the market of Jaywick Sands? Is that something you're raising with us?
Well, only to the extent that we hear today that we're at the early consultation stages, yet a very large interim report has been prepared. We're told also that the Environment Agency is not yet ready to report on their part of it. So this to me feels like a very elongated time frame, and I'm wondering really what the benefit of that is.
No, thank you, Chris. Understood. Hannah, did you want to add anything to the sort of time frame? I mean, these kind of plans do take, when you're engaging properly with communities on this, what we wouldn't want to do is rush something through that really doesn't take the community with us. I mean, it's in the past we've had situations where really the community is not on board with what the local authorities' views were on Jaywick Sands. That's a mistake that the council doesn't want to repeat again. but a consequence of trying to do this properly and keeping the community involved in it. The consequence is it takes a bit of time. And I wish the stars were more aligned in terms of reports from the important agencies such as the Environment Agency and other authorities that are involved in this. But I completely appreciate the concern that the longer this, I guess, uncertainty around what may or may not be proposed for Jaywick Sands, the longer that lasts, the more fragility that could bring to the market in the area. And I think that's a point well made, Chris.
Thank you.
Yeah, I think we'll certainly take it on board. But I suppose just to reassure you from the flood risk perspective, what the Environment Agency are saying is that the existing defences are in fairly good condition. They're not going to fail. They do not believe, in the very near future. And they do probably have 2 or maybe even 3 decades worth of life left in them, 20 to 30 years worth of life left in them. Now, that sounds like a long time. As Gary said, we all know that bringing forward infrastructure projects as significant as flood defences can take 20 years, so we better start thinking about that now and helping come up with that plan. But I suppose all I'd want to just reassure you and any other residents who are worried about that situation, it's whilst the flood risk is increasing, there is a risk to some of the seafront properties, and that is shown in the Environment Agency's current modelling. And if you need more detail about that, you can obtain that from the Environment Agency on a site-specific basis. It is not, going to a sort of doomsday scenario in the next 5 or 10 years or even 20 or 30 years. So it is a gradual thing that we are looking to build up.
Thanks very much, Hannah. And I know there are other people sort of listening in and watching via the YouTube, Facebook links. Chris, thank you ever so much for your input. And please do, if you get the opportunity, either come along, please put in comments, and we hope to have sort of more detail building up over the next stages of this project. I'm conscious that we do have other people on the call. I know we have a Liz on there. Don't feel under any pressure that you have to speak, Liz, but if you did want to raise any questions with us or make any statements, please do feel free to. Otherwise, come and see us at one of our events, or put something in the chat, or email us with any concerns or questions you might have. But Liz, I didn't want to deny you the opportunity to have an input into the discussion if you wanted to. Okay, thanks very much. So we've got about got a few more minutes if there's anything that suddenly comes up. Anthony, have you had anything come through via the alternative channels?
Yep. No, we haven't had any questions at the moment.
Could you just?
So I think
that's lovely. Could you just remind us again of the next face-to-face events for this consultation? Is it all right if we can either if we all can put the slide back up, or Anthony, if you can just run through those for the benefit of anybody that's listening in.
So we've got an event. The next event is on Friday the 7th of October at Martello Tower from 11 a.m. to 3 p.m. And that's an exhibition. You can just walk in, have a chat to anybody about any concern. Targeting, we want questions targeted really on the regeneration of Jaywick Sands, and so you can anytime between those hours of 11 a.m. and 3 p.m. please just pop in. And then we've got Thursday the 13th of October from 10:30 a.m. to 1 p.m. at the Community Resource Centre, and then the final event on Saturday the 22nd of October from 10 a.m. to 1 p.m. at the Community Resource Centre. Alternatively, you can go online to the TDC website. If you go into local plan Jaywick Sands, we have videos on there that give a summary of all the exhibition material, and you can fill in a questionnaire online there. I have a quick question of my own, just around about Brooklands. And Hannah, you were talking about having a one-way system on there, and I know that is something that's being discussed at the exhibitions. A lot of people have comments on that. Can you just explain a little bit about the why that would be a good option to have a one-way system along Brooklands, what the thinking is behind that, and if what the comments are around that.
Yeah, sure. It's a great question. So one of the challenges with Brooklands is that when it was originally built, we didn't have the sort of standards that we have now for roads. Cars were kind of actually in their infancy. It was the early days of people being excited about having cars, but no one really understood what that was going to mean for the physical environment. So the first houses in Brooklands, the ones that face the sea, were built very, very close to, well, it wasn't the seawall as we know it now, but the original sea defences. It was a sort of sloping bank that went down, because really everyone thought, let's put everything as close to the sea as possible. This is great. We're going to have a lovely seaside resort. But what that did is it doesn't leave enough room in between what's now the seawall and the front gardens for a compliant 2-lane road plus a pavement either side that's safe for people to walk along. So to achieve that, you would, for a 2-lane road which has buses going down it as it does, you would need 6 meters for the road itself, and then you would need a minimum of 1.5 meters for a footway on either side, and ideally you'd want a footway on both sides, but a minimum on the other one side only. And the distance that we actually have there, it varies a little bit along the length, but it's barely 6 meters at best there. Sometimes it's kind of down to 5.5. So it's really narrow, and hence one gets a lot of the challenges, which are, sometimes people can't pass. If someone does park on Brooklands, it can be difficult to get round. And also, really importantly, we're talking about the community, people who live in Brooklands who would like to be able to walk and cycle down there safely. It's actually meant to be part of the National Footpath Network. It's meant to be a part of the kind of looking at the cycle routes linking up everywhere. But at the moment, it just doesn't provide that safe environment, because you're walking in the road, you're walking in the carriageway along with all of the cars and so forth. However, there is enough width to create a well-designed, compliant one-way street. So you could make a carriageway, you could have a good-sized footway, and so forth, and that would be wide enough for buses to come down. And it's something that when we were doing initial informal consultation, talking to people in the community, talking to some of the community groups and so forth, was being raised as an issue. What should we do about Brooklands? It's not working for us. We don't like it. It's just not, it's unsafe. It's not good. So we wanted to put that out there for consultation with a little sketch, because we know it's hard for people to imagine what that might actually feel like in reality. That sketch is very much just the starter for 10. There's much more design work that would need to be done on that, but it just sets out maybe what that could look like. The idea would be that the one-way system would run like the buses do now. So the buses currently go down Lotus Way, round the back, and then they come back along Brooklands. So that would be the routing. So that still works with the buses. You'd then have a footway next to the houses. You'd have a pavement next to the houses. Buses could stop when you got off the bus. You weren't just kind of getting off into the road, into the mud and so forth. And it would be a nicer environment for all, potentially. So that's the rationale behind that, is making it much safer, and more like a kind of designed street rather than a piece of land that's almost become a street by accident, which is really what its history is all about.
Thanks, Hannah. I know it's early days because we've still got a lot of people to talk to and a lot of people to see over the coming weeks. But has there been any sort of particular initial feedback on whether this would be a good or a bad idea in terms of any community feedback so far, or is it a bit too early?
Yeah, there's been a lot of positive feedback and a lot of really useful other feedback as well. So, for instance, maybe that there needs to be a bit more thought about resident parking and how that integrates. So those are really, really useful, because obviously these are really early days concepts. But I would say that at the moment we've had a lot of really positive feedback on that. People do see Brooklands as a problem. Yes, this isn't the final design. This is definitely not the full answer. We can't just go and kind of build this tomorrow and make it look like that. There's some detail that isn't working, that probably need a bit more thought, consultation with residents. But I would say from what we've heard so far on the online survey and at the event we had the other day, broadly speaking, a lot of really positive feedback.
Well, thank you very much, Hannah. Okay, well, I found that useful, I think, Hannah, and I hope that people listening in remotely have at least got a flavour for what the consultation is about, and learnt a bit from what the kind of feedback that we're hoping to get. A special thank you to everybody that's tuned in. And thank you to our guests on the call, in particular, Chris. Thank you ever so much for your input into the discussion. I hope to hear from you again, because I think you're very engaged with this, and I'm really pleased that people are reading the documentation. I'm grateful for that. What I'm going to do now, unless I have any objections, is I'm going to close the webinar. I'd like to thank my colleagues, Hannah, Shmuel, Anthony, and others for your time this evening. Thank you to our guests, especially Chris, and we look forward to hopefully seeing some of our local residents our next face-to-face consultation session. And I wish you all a very good evening. Good night. Thank you.